So without further ado, please welcome Niko from TechOpener and a few other companies.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Niko.
It's nice that we can drink lemonade while doing this.
Lemonade, yes. So he's drinking tequila.
Only because there's a Mexican in the audience.
Okay.
Little shout out, a tequila fan. I was easily convinced.
So I'd like to start this conversation by you telling us in just a few sentences what you do today. So what in your case, different companies you run are all about. And then we'll start.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of basically 3 companies that service the tech and startup ecosystem. One of them, let's do it maybe by time. So we started with Ahoy, which is a coworking company, and we have 2 spaces right now, one in Berlin, one in Brazil, in São Paulo. The second company is a festival, which is called TechOpener, which is an interdisciplinary technology festival. And the third company is an agency called Openers. And Openers helps tech companies with communication services, enter new markets, and we do work with corporates also on trying to sort of get them closer to the startup ecosystem and build bridges into the world of startup.
Cool. You started with a fairly typical sort of business background, right? But you come from a family of publishers.
Mm-hmm.
So how has that shaped what you're doing today?
Well, I think there's always been, sort of a passion for content. And this is also how we see TechOpener today. It is, it is a tech conference, but it is one that we treat almost like a newspaper. So I think if I were to start a company, if I had lived like 50 years ago, I would have probably founded a newspaper. Like I'm really, intrigued by content and publishing, but an event it's a medium that you can transport messages with. And it's a medium that actually has a direct kind of business model behind it, a modern business model where you can sell tickets to and sponsorship. So it is much easier than to actually have a online magazine or blog, etc., which is what I actually started out with.
And did you, was that clear that you sort of wanted to go into the content side basically from the get-go?
Yeah, so I was working at a venture capital firm at the time after my first company. And there was, not a lot of deal flow. So I was a venture partner. I was also an entrepreneur in residence there. So I was looking at, next businesses to start, but I couldn't really find anything that I was particularly passionate in. So I started a blog, and it was just a personal endeavor. It was called TechBerlin, and I would interview founders, and I would write about the Berlin startup ecosystem. And that kind of kickstarted everything around servicing the ecosystem.
And from there on, you then basically started working on, you joined another company, right?
Amazon at one point, yeah. That's probably for the second part of the, but yeah, I did join Amazon at one point, which was great. But the need to join Amazon was also to just be able to do these other projects or these other companies. So it was a way to almost finance my life and finance these creative ideas.
And your blog, together with Silicon Alley, there was the 2 really publications in Berlin about the tech scene, I think. Gründerszene didn't exist yet, and Deutsche Startups didn't exist. So what did it feel like to be in Berlin back then?
I do think they existed, just to note, but we were the first English language medium on the startup ecosystem here in Berlin.
Before Venture Village.
Before Venture Village, which eventually was kind of spun out of Gründerszene. So how was the startup scene back then? It was, it's not that long ago. I have gray hair, but I'm not ancient.
They got more and more gray.
They did get more and more gray. I think there's like a few changes that I witnessed. One is that we've moved in Berlin, I think, from a very operations and sales centric approach to startups to one that is more product and tech focused. So you've seen this in kind of the early days. You had a lot of companies that would copy American business model, often in e-commerce, in marketplaces. So things that were very operational and very sales driven. So things that also Rocket Internet really excelled at, having these sort of consultant, folks joining them, and just focusing on building a great logistics and operational setup for their companies. And I think gradually we've seen this change and get more and more into product and tech-centric companies. One just walked in, which is Ramzi from IAM.
Yeah.
So things like this that were
he was on your seat 2 months ago. So.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
So companies that would really build something around product. I guess also community, which is what we've been doing with TOA and with Ahoy. So that's definitely one change that we've seen. Another obvious change is there's more money now. VCs from abroad especially have been starting to invest more and more in Berlin. American VCs have come to invest here in Berlin. We've had a few decent exits that I guess kind of fuel also the confidence of investors to invest more into the Berlin ecosystem. I guess those are somewhat gradual incremental changes that we've seen. Nothing like totally disruptive, right? Like from one year to the other.
And so how did then the blog lead to the next steps?
So at one point actually, so this was interesting. So when I was working at the venture capital fund, my whole life was very much sort of top down, right? You look at markets, you identify opportunities, and you go from market analysis to market analysis, and you sort of break those down into individual product ideas. With the blog, I started doing things more bottoms up. So looking at how can we actually have an impact on the Berlin startup ecosystem with servicing the startups here and all the stakeholders within the wider organized ecosystem. But then it was also very organic. Like I didn't make those choices necessarily deliberately. I had a real estate investor approach me and said, "You want to open a co-working space?" So I said, "Sure, let's open a co-working space," and that was the kickstart to Ahoy.
But then you also opened a Ahoy in Brazil, of all places.
That came, much later. And again, like I somehow let go of, trying to plan things, and I kind of just surrender to a lot of opportunities. I guess I don't say no all too often. So somebody approached me and said, "Hey, why don't we open a co-working space in Brazil?" And the obvious thing would obviously be to open another one in Berlin, which we're going to do, but or go to Leipzig, or go to Frankfurt, or go to Cologne, and have sort of this master plan of taking over, all these cities in Germany. But we've decided to just, see what opportunities are there, wait for things to come. We have a very kind of long-term view of what we're doing in all these three companies. So we just jumped on board, and it's been a great partnership in Brazil, doing this with a local partner there. It's actually a much more beautiful space, to be honest. It's really pimped out.
Okay, we should all go check it out then.
Yep.
What's important to you because you've done really a lot of different things and they've really grown. How big was the first TOA?
First TOA was 650 people.
Right.
Yeah.
And how big is it going to be in mid-July, hopefully?
Well, I say 20,000 people plus. I mean, you don't know in the end, right? But that's what we expect. So we actually consistently grew by 100% year on year. So last year we thought we wouldn't grow as fast, and we said, we've grown already to 5,000 attendees in 2015. So I thought, maybe 7.5, but then we more than doubled again, and we grew to 11,500 last year. So if that trend continues, I guess we'll go over 20,000 attendees, and it looks like it will.
And what matters to you in these very different projects, very different sizes? Like Openers is how many people right now?
In the team?
Yeah.
17.
Okay. And then to contrast that, TOA together with the helpers is?
I mean, the TOA kind of scales up. So I would say all year round, on average, 15 people. Right now we're almost 60. So like 6 months a year, I guess we scale this up to around 60 people. But then we have 400 volunteers and probably another 300 people on site working, like technicians and securities and staffing on site.
And so to my original question, like, what matters to you, right? Because ultimately, in many ways, you're the unifying factor of all these different things. So they've grown a lot in size. They're also grown in activities. They're always oriented towards service. But what are your guiding principles when you approach these things?
I guess I like to work with nice people, and and have a good time doing it. So same thing with openness, right? We never had the plan to do openness, but Kerstin and Karoli, my co-founders, approached me and said, look, we got to have an agency side to TOA. And I said, I don't want to work in an agency, no way. And they're like, well, you can be sort of a co-founder. You don't have to have an active role in it. So again, it was something that I kind of jumped on board because it felt good and because, I could work with two amazing people. So I think this is often the underlying factor, and I think this has worked so far.
Okay, let's talk a bit about TOA, sort of the official part, and we'll go into
the unofficial.
Yeah, in the Q&A. But what were the big milestones? So each year, how big was it year to year? How has that grown? And also, how has it changed in terms of what you wanted to make out of it?
I think the big first milestone was that we hit our crowdfunding campaign. So we crowdfunded the
for
festival.
the first one.
Yeah. So we started with no money, like literally no money, which is probably something more for the second part of the interview. And we decided to do a crowdfunding campaign. So that was the first big milestone, and we were the first crowdfunded festival actually in the world. The other big milestones, I guess, doubling in size year over year on all metrics, and then the financing round last year.
Right, and that for you, the financing round was because you really got. You got an amount in, but you also got very strategic investors, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it really felt you really handpicked who you wanted to be part of that.
Yeah, we're totally blessed with the type of folks that invested in the end. I think we have every unicorn founder, whatever that means. People like to use that expression for some, reasons. But it shows, that these guys that have grown, considerable businesses here in Berlin, they want to gather around this idea of building a unifying platform for knowledge exchange and collaboration. We have some folks in there like Christoph Meyer, like the godfather sort of the Berlin tech ecosystem. But also, from Paris, we have the family, we have Passion Capital with Stefan Glemser from London. So we also looked at, how can we kind of get, European stakeholders that share this vision of also bridging between the different ecosystems that we have here in Europe. And Europe has to somewhat unite. We're not like Berlin will never be Silicon Valley, London will never be Silicon Valley. So all these newspaper articles that describe that they're clickbait basically. But together I think we could become a pretty decent counterweight to Silicon Valley or to Tel Aviv.
And is it something you've also seen in the type of companies that attend and also speak at TOA, that originally it was, as a function of Berlin's ecosystem, more e-commerce businesses, and now I know that you're moving for a while into very techy subjects, and almost I would say sort of sector agnostic, but really focus on the technology part, and you really see yourself as a technology platform.
and also in a very differentiated way. So we want to steer away from this kind of self-referential glorification of startups and startup founders, right? So I should be sitting here even like generally this, what I see a lot in startup media is sort of an undifferentiated view on technology, but also on startup entrepreneurship. It's been almost glorified in the sense of like startup entrepreneurs do something much better than any other entrepreneur, whether you have a bakery or a hairdressing salon. So we try to steer away from that. Like we also we try to stay away from the word startup. So we use it really sporadically for startup pitch events where we just don't get around it. But generally we don't want to be perceived as a startup event. Although there's tons of startups. We're gonna have, I guess, this year like probably 7,000 startup representatives, like direct startup representatives, and over 1,000 startups. But that's just one part of the equation, and we like to take a differentiated view on technology and kind of shine a light on all the areas of technology and its impact on the wider society. So almost, and it's a slow progress. We're moving there, like you said. We have more and more future tech subjects. We invite more and more journalists to do the interviews, for example. I think that makes for a much better fireside chat if you have a New York Times journalist than another founder, for example. So, kind of steering a little bit away from the Kool-Aid and looking at the cons and pros of technology, for human civilization.
There's a plethora of festivals, summits. I mean, every week there's something that markets itself as major. And how do you find your voice and then keep it consistently? And I guess it's along the question I asked before about what is important to you, but it is an increasingly competitive environment, specifically in that event space.
Yeah, so I would like to ask a question actually, can I? So who's been on the TOA website? Hands up. And leave the hand up if you understood what we do. Okay, a few, better than I thought. So I think, it's really complex. Our product is, really complex, and we talk about this in our team all the time. It's been 6 years now, and I think next year we'll see us, simplifying our message enormously. It is really complex. We have so many streams to it. We started a conference this year just for Mittelstands companies and corporates, which is called Disrupted, which is also becoming part of TOA. We have a format that's called Open Circle, which is, very exclusive and geared towards the speakers. We have the TOA WorldTour events, which are our international events. We have TOA Live as a blog and magazine. And it's confusing to people. So I think, to your question, we have to simplify it further. Right now, the common denominator is interdisciplinary, so that we look at, technology at the intersection of culture. We want to bring science much more into the game. I think it's also important for Berlin as an ecosystem, that the universities play a larger role in the overall startup environment. We want to bring art and music further in. And platform as a second, that we are open, that we say we have those satellite events. You can play an active part in the festival by creating your own satellite event. And that's your event. We don't have any guidelines. As long as it's ticketed by us, you can do your event and give TOA really your own personal flavor as an institution, as a university, as a company. We have embassies doing event, consulates, etc. So, but already that is just, I think, almost too much. So next year, we have a few ideas. I think we'll do some drastic changes and make it much more streamlined as a message.
And at the same time, you're also, one thing you didn't mention you're doing is you have these events internationally. So you did one in LA, you did one in Tokyo, which is sort of a mini TOA. So similar spirit, but just how many?
Exactly. Like they're small events. So they're around 200 people per event. And the aim of that is to, basically, if TOA is a platform for interdisciplinary knowledge exchange and collaboration, and that's a super clumsy mission statement, by the way. So if there's any ad and branding consultants out there, I think we can simplify that. But we're losing one word almost per year on it, so it gets shorter and shorter.
I mean, you shortened from Tech Opener to
TOA.
TOA.
It used to be like a platform for tech, music, art, and science, and we would name all those. And then we said, let's all phrase this under human spirit. And then people thought that was too hippie, so we left human spirit. But if we're a platform for interdisciplinary knowledge exchange and collaboration, then these international events, I can still say it at least. I do remember it.
Say it again.
But I'm also only half a drink in. So, then the international events are almost like a more meta level where we say, let's also build a platform for knowledge exchange and collaboration between ecosystems and between emerging ecosystems, right? That's why we went to LA and not to San Francisco. We went to Tokyo and not to, let's say, Hong Kong or Shanghai. We went to Austin because of South by. We're going to do LA again this year. We're looking at Mexico City in November, Cape Town in February, and then back to Japan in April. So it's like a little tour around the world, but it's also serves sort of the goal of connecting at least one ecosystem per continent with Berlin, and build these relationships. And it's been working. I mean, on a small level, right? It's only 200 attendees, but I think we had 30 people from Berlin that showed up in Los Angeles. In Tokyo we had people from Berlin, and now we see how these folks then come to Berlin, and we introduce them to folks. So it's not so scalable, but I think it's important, especially if you get the opinion leaders of these individual emerging ecosystems. So these smaller events are by invite only. So they're a little bit more exclusive, and we target the opinion leaders, and we had great folks like Sergey Brin, that showed up in LA, for example, or the founder of LinkedIn, and Grammy winners and Oscar winners, Golden Globe. Like, what do you do when you're in LA? When in
Sure.
Rome,
You hang out with Sergey.
when in Rome, right? But I think there's something going on there.
Right.
But again, no master plan, no 10-year. LA has to be 20,000 attendees. We just let it go, and we react to sort of a very organic demand that we see. So Japan is going to grow quite a bit already next year. I think we're going to grow from 200 to well over 1,000 attendees next year.
Which makes it also then a different concept, right?
Yeah. So but Japan, the demand was insane. I mean, people, we were sold out within an hour. We're not sold out in Berlin, by the way. Just a little promotional plug. You can still get your tickets. And then also what I've never actually witnessed is that in Japan, people would write me emails and say, give me another price. I can pay more. What is the price that I can get a ticket? I'm like, we're actually sold out. Like, there is no ticket. Very different to Berlin experience, where we usually get sort of...
Yeah, you don't get a lot of people who want to pay more.
No, not so many actually. So it's more like a lot of emails, asking for discounts. I do get those quite a bit. Yeah, but Berlin has no money. I mean, let's face it, right? I mean, maybe more for the second part. But it is just, if you look at GDP per capita in Berlin, and if you compare that to Hamburg, and both things being equal, growing at the same rate, it'll take over 30 years for Berlin to reach a per capita GDP like Hamburg, and I think that's quite significant, like to think about that. We're still so far off.
There's an interesting topic in what you said about the fact that you're doing a Mittelstands disrupt was the name?
Yeah, disrupted.
Disrupted. Disrupt would be
too close.
Too close.
We're doing this with a partner, with a university in Berlin.
And I wonder, because that's really something, in my opinion, which in the last 2 years had a huge acceleration. Every Mittelstand company realizing, there's this thing, it's called the internet, and it actually will affect the way we work. Do you, when you interact with these Mittelständler, and like, what's your impression compared to, our tech world?
Is that the on the record or off the record?
No, I was thinking the same thing. So this is
but no. I mean, to be honest, I think I don't interact with that many, right? And we are just starting this format, and it is the backbone of the German economy. The so-called Mittelstand, family-owned. 97% of Mittelstands company are actually family-owned. We have a few of them invested also in TOA, like Fiesmann, for example, which is a really large Mittelstands company. And where you have a younger generation, in these families kind of moving into the leadership roles, you see the willingness to transform. But I think, this word transformation is already a little bit faulty. People talk about, corporate transformation, or the transformation of, the Mittelstand, or, the transformation of the economy. I think, that's the best case scenario. We spoke about this, right? I mean, if German Mittelstands or corporates can transform, that's amazing, because that means they'll be alive, like they just come out different. But I think it's actually the wrong word to use, because transformation will likely happen to just a subset of those companies, and we have to prepare also for the fact that a lot of them won't be around. Hence the disrupted.
Yes.
Yeah.
To me, it seems it's almost like an e-commerce wave, the similar wave like in e-commerce 7-8 years ago, now happening in corporates and Mittelstand, who are all digitizing and transforming, and with very different success, I think, probabilities.
I think it can work if it comes from the top, right? Like, it has to be driven from the CEO, or at least from the board, or from the chairman. Axel Springer is a good example, right? They've been long-term partners of ours, and Matthias Döpfner, the CEO, was a speaker last year, and we've had kind of the chance also to meet with him before that, for over a few years, and to see just how the transformation in media, which is likely one of the most disrupted ones out there, right? Music, film, media. I mean, these guys have been hit pretty hard. Music, I think, lost 40% of revenue due to the internet. But it's really driven from the absolute top, which obviously causes friction within the organization, but it brings you to act faster than if you have an innovation department, and we deal with these innovation departments all the time, right? At TOA, corporate innovation departments are generally the first ones that reach out to us, and they are always really passionate about, changing their organization. They're really passionate folks out there, and they're fighting this, uphill battle in their organizations. And I think if they don't have their buy-in from senior leadership, it is just really hard to make any drastic changes. So we also, for Disrupted, our idea was like, this conference is geared at the owners and CXOs and really senior executives. The innovation department folks can come, but they need to bring one of the senior folks with them, which should be in their interest, right? Because this way they can be like, come, there's an event, I can only go if you go. Let's go as a tandem and, expose the senior leadership also to these themes. And I think an event like TOA is a good opportunity for them, to hang around 5 hours at TOA and, catch a blockchain, a panel or something. It will stimulate, because they're all very smart people. I mean, you don't get to become CEO of a DAX company if you're not brilliant, but they lack time and resources to really think about what is going on and to dive a little bit deeper and to trust also the folks that have that time in their organization. That's key.
Yeah, I mean, as my little anecdote, just 2 days ago, I had a friend of mine who runs a private equity fund asking me if agile was something to be taken seriously or not. So, and he's, as you say, he's a brilliant guy, but just a very different world. I have a last question, and then we'll go to the Q&A. You mentioned frictions before in terms of at the Mittelstand companies. What about running those last few weeks before the event with your team, and how intense does it get?
I mean, it's super intense at the moment, as you know, which is why I was a little late. So there's always something, right? It just never works as planned. And events have, I think, a particular thing. By the way, I never wanted to be doing events. Like, just to reiterate what I said in the beginning, the only reason why we're doing this is because we are actually in love with content and with experiences, and it's just a great way to distribute content with a somewhat of an okay business model. Not great, but okay. But events have something very particular about them that you can't postpone the deadline. I mean, even if you build an app, you can just, postpone it, you do it a week later, and, this one variable is fixed. And it's almost like the only variable that is fixed is the date of the event. So all other variables are in flow, and, our COO, got hospitalized, he's going to be fine, etc., but he's going to be out for 3 weeks. So these things then just, make things quite intense. But I think for it's almost like eustress. Have you heard of eustress? Mm-hmm. So I was looking for, affirmation that stress can be good, and I found it. You find everything on the internet. So eustress is apparently positive stress that is actually healthy, that you can strive on, that I guess politicians have, otherwise they could never do the jobs they do. And that is these last weeks, and it releases a lot of endorphins and adrenaline, of course, like you really have biochemical reactions. So yeah, we enjoy it. We like that phase. In terms of friction, I mean, it's constant friction.
Talking biochemical reactions, your COO actually told me that there's also clearly a post-event depression phenomenon when you really don't feel that great, even though everything went well. Yeah,
it's pretty miserable, but we're getting used to it, and I also think it's fine. It's just part of TOA. It's tough for the first timers, like they really don't know what to do and often quit because they say they can't handle kind of going from this crazy adrenaline to falling into this sort of hole, because the sales or the general product cycle is so long, right? It's a 1 year cycle. Like the day after tour, 30 things that you want to do better. You're like, fuck this, I can do better, and this, and every team member has that. and then you know you will have to wait a whole year to make that work, to implement that. So that can be very frustrating. But yeah, I think if you do an active vacation after, you're fine. Just don't do a passive vacation. So sitting at a beach, bad idea. Jumping off a plane, maybe good idea. Right? Maybe good idea, right? Yeah.
Wonderful.
There were things in life also than a post-event depression.
Yeah.
It's not that bad.
I hope, yeah.